Once upon a time, California wasn't just a place, it was a dream, a shining promise that anything was possible under the golden sun. But in the 1970s, amidst deep crisis and growing uncertainty, that dream was tested like never before. While the world around it fractured under the weight of economic turmoil, political scandals, and social unrest, California faced turbulence, rebellion, and reinvention, pushing its people to rethink everything they knew. Yet hidden within the chaos, something extraordinary was quietly taking shape. In dusty garages, crowded clubs, and quiet moments of defiance, ideas were born that would change the course of history. This is the story of how one tumultuous decade transformed not just California, but the entire world. In the years leading up to the 1970s, California had captured the imagination of an entire nation. It was a land of endless summers, wide-open highways, and the belief that the future could be whatever you wanted it to be. The post-war boom had filled its cities with dreamers, artists, inventors, rebels, all drawn by the promise of reinvention under the endless blue skies. California wasn't just where people went to start over. It was where people went to start something entirely new. But as the 1970s arrived, the dream began to shift. The optimism of the 1950s and the revolutionary spirit of the 1960s collided with harsh realities, economic downturns, political scandals, energy crises, and growing disillusionment. The California dream, once so effortless, now demanded resilience, creativity, and a willingness to confront an uncertain future. Instead of fading, the dream evolved. It became something rawer, more urgent, no longer about escaping reality, but about reshaping it from the ground up. Across the state, people responded in ways that would leave a permanent mark on history. In San Francisco, a vibrant counterculture reimagined society itself, pushing for rights and recognition long overdue. In Southern California, young surfers, skaters, and musicians began inventing entirely new ways to move, to live, and to express themselves. And in a handful of garages, a new generation of tech pioneers started tinkering with machines that most of the world couldn't yet imagine would soon change everything. California in the 1970s was no longer a utopia, it was a crucible, a place where hardship, rebellion, and radical optimism collided, forging ideas powerful enough to ripple across the planet. The dream was no longer just about sunshine and easy living. It had become a deeper, grittier promise that even in times of uncertainty, even when the old ways crumbled, there was always a chance to build something better. This was not the end of the California dream. It was its rebirth. The 1970s hit America like a storm, and California stood directly in its path. The economy faltered under the weight of inflation, gas shortages, and unemployment. Lines stretched for blocks at gas stations, while families struggled with the rising cost of living. The Golden State that had once symbolized limitless opportunity now seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. Political scandals deepened the national sense of disillusionment. In the aftermath of Vietnam and Watergate, trust in government crumbled. Protests no longer carried the hopeful energy of change, but the exhausted anger of a generation betrayed. The streets of California, once filled with the music of peace rallies, now echoed with frustration, rebellion, and uncertainty. And yet, within this turbulence, California didn't break, it adapted. The same pressures that crushed traditional institutions also cracked open new spaces for imagination and resistance. Communities banded together, giving rise to powerful social movements. Environmentalists fighting to protect fragile coastlines. Feminists demanding equal rights. Farm workers standing up for dignity and fair wages. Voices long silenced found new strength, reshaping the conversation about who belonged in the American dream. Culture, too, began to splinter and evolve. In the dark corners of Los Angeles and San Francisco, the bright optimism of the 1960s gave way to grittier, more authentic forms of expression. Punk music roared out of garages. Underground art scenes flourished, and independent filmmakers tore down the glitz of Hollywood to tell stories raw and real. Creativity no longer came from chasing perfection, it came from embracing imperfection. California in the 1970s was battered, bruised, but fiercely alive. It was a place where failure was no longer feared, but seen as the first step toward reinvention. In the midst of a national crisis, California quietly began writing a new future, one built not on the promises of the past, but on the stubborn belief that even broken dreams could spark a revolution. While much of California struggled with uncertainty, in a few quiet corners, something entirely different was unfolding. In dusty garages and cluttered suburban homes, a handful of restless dreamers were busy building the future. They weren't waiting for the world to fix itself, they were creating a new one, piece by piece, with whatever they had at hand. In the heart of the Santa Clara Valley, what would soon be known as Silicon Valley, young visionaries like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were tinkering with circuits, screens, and big ideas. Their tools were simple, but their ambitions were limitless: to make technology personal, accessible, and transformative. What began as hobbyist clubs and homebrew experiments would soon ignite a revolution that would reshape communication, business, and daily life across the planet. But the story of Silicon Valley wasn't just about machines. It was about a mindset born out of the turbulence of the era. Failure was embraced, risk was celebrated, and rebellion against the status quo wasn't just accepted, it was expected. In a time when traditional industries were faltering, innovation became an act of defiance, a way of refusing to let the future be decided by fear or inertia. Outside the tech world, the same spirit pulsed through the veins of California. Skateboarding exploded from empty backyard pools, turning suburban rebellion into a global sport. Independent filmmakers rewrote the rules of storytelling. Artists, designers, and writers pushed against every boundary they could find. California was becoming the world's great experimental lab, messy, chaotic, and wildly alive. By the end of the 1970s, the seeds planted in those makeshift workspaces were starting to take root. The first personal computers appeared. New networks quietly linked machines together, foreshadowing a digital age no one could fully imagine yet. Amazing to think that today, Silicon Valley is the place for entrepreneurship par excellence, isn't it? But wait, because we still have a lot of amazing things to remember from that decade. As California reimagined technology, it was also reinventing culture. The 1970s unleashed a creative energy that tore down old traditions and built something raw, vibrant, and completely new. In music, the state shifted from the mellow harmonies of the late 1960s to the fierce, unfiltered sounds of punk rock and new wave. Bands like the Dead Kennedys and Black Flag roared out of garages and dive bars, giving voice to a generation disillusioned with polished fantasies and hungry for something real. In film, a similar rebellion took hold. Young directors, many of them from California, turned their backs on the glittering studio system to craft stories that were grittier, darker, and more human. Movies like Star Wars, Apocalypse Now, and Chinatown didn't just entertain, they redefined storytelling, capturing the uncertainty and ambition of the era. Independent cinema flourished, proving that even small, raw stories could shake the world. Lifestyle, too, was undergoing a profound shift. The pursuit of success gave way to a deeper search for meaning. California became the cradle of the wellness movement, where yoga studios, organic markets, and holistic health centers began to appear in places once dominated by fast food and freeways. People sought new ways to live, closer to nature, closer to themselves, rejecting the idea that happiness could be bought or sold. Surf culture exploded beyond the beaches, influencing fashion, language, and attitudes around the world. Skateboarding, born from drought-stricken backyards, grew into a symbol of freedom and fearless creativity. In every corner of life, Californians were reshaping what it meant to dream and what it meant to be alive. By the end of the 1970s, California was no longer just the land of golden beaches and movie stars. It had become the blueprint for the modern world. The experiments born in the chaos of the decade had taken root, quietly shaping everything from how we communicate to how we express ourselves, how we work, dream, and fight for change. The seeds of Silicon Valley grew into the global tech industry, connecting billions of people across invisible networks that those early visionaries could scarcely have imagined. The cultural revolutions in music, film, and lifestyle rippled outward, inspiring new generations to break rules, tell new stories, and live life on their own terms. The California dream, once thought to be fading, had simply evolved, becoming bigger, messier, and more powerful than ever. Beyond technology and entertainment, the spirit of the 1970s left a deeper legacy, a belief in the power of individuals to reshape their world. Activists who marched for the environment, for equality, for dignity, planted movements that continue to grow today. Entrepreneurs who once built computers in their garages opened the doors for millions of future innovators. Artists who rejected the mainstream carved out spaces where creativity could thrive without permission. California in the 1970s taught the world that progress doesn't come from comfort, it comes from disruption. That reinvention isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. That sometimes, when the old systems fail, the best response is to build something entirely new with your own hand. Today, every time we swipe a screen, hear a rebellious song, or imagine a better future, we are living in the world California helped create. It wasn't a smooth journey. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was fearless, and it changed everything. And it all began with a dream, battered by reality, but stronger for having survived. California in the 1970s wasn't just living through change. It was laying down the first stones for the world we know today. From the chaos of those years rose a California that led in technology, culture, and innovation, setting the pace for an entire planet. It was in those sun-drenched streets and restless nights that the foundation for a powerful, dynamic California was built, one driven by the belief that reinvention was always possible. Today, it's easy to wonder if that spirit still burns as brightly. With new challenges and uncertainties on the horizon, some say California is a dream in decline. Others believe it's simply entering another cycle of transformation, just as it did half a century ago. The question isn't whether the dream has ended, it's whether we're ready to dream it anew. And now we turn the question to you. Would you have wanted to live through the wild, rebellious 1970s? Do you think California's best days are behind it, or still to come? We'd love to hear your thoughts, share your memories, your dreams, and your visions for the future in the comments below. Let's rewind together and imagine what could be next.